Thank you for taking a moment to watch our video about the pictorial we submitted to Creativity and Cognition titled Organic Abstractions, an Exploration of Space Through Multiple Mediums. The Environmental Design program at Auburn is a program that asks students to consider multiple disciplines of design when formulating solutions related to the built environment. Our program begins with an intensive 5-week introductory workshop that asks students to reconsider the world around them through the use of abstraction. Last summer, this studio was taught by Kelly Homan, a landscape architect, David Smith, a graphic designer, and myself, Robert Sproull, an architect. We used multiple tools and techniques to investigate various scales of design. Ideas were conceptualized through prototyping, graphite pattern explorations, and computer graphic representations. The origins of organic abstraction are best understood adjacent to the underpinnings of thought prior to its emergence as a conceptual driver for design. During the early 20th century, design was defined by deliberate formalism generated through reason and precision. Eventually, philosophical thought emerged that would situate abstraction over representation, process over product, intuition over logic. This helped inform organic design that embraced creativity and iterative processes that result in unforeseeable and novel outcomes. The methods we talk about here are what Frank Lloyd Wright called an earnest search for reality. They ask students to abandon their biases and look at the world in a new way.
So for the beginning of the studio, we had the students do a series of drawings. So as Robert mentioned, the idea is that we're going to go between mediums, drawing, making models, and 3D modeling in the computer. But first, to get them started, what we did was have students do a series of drawings, which is what you're seeing now on the screen, that explored the figure ground. And we did a play on the figure ground. The figure ground comes from a 20th century idea rooted in psychology. It's about how our brain sees figures and forms. So the students started by taking 5 different iterative sketches of figures and grounds, different forms with different backgrounds. We then took those drawings and began to make prototype models. So what you're seeing now are the students taking those forms and manifesting them in a physical model. We did a series of prototypes. So they started with 5 drawings, they created 5 models. And from there, they started to refine each of those. So what you're seeing now on the screen are these refined drawings that students spent probably 4 weeks creating. When we talk about this, it kind of seems like a linear process, but it really wasn't. So they would go from drawing to model making, back to drawing, back to model making. What we ended up with in the first part of the semester was a series of iterative sketches, graphite sketches, and a series of prototype models. They started with 5 that they're then going to narrow down to 1.
So as part of the process, students were asked to reconsider their 2-dimensional graphic drawings as 3-dimensional constructions. Working through form, space, order, and in some instances, materiality, students reinterpreted their 2-dimensional drawings as 3-dimensional physical models. The intention of these objects was an exploration in form and space alone. Notions of scale were set aside. To separate the built object from its initial single-scale conception, students were required to execute a series of complex operations using 3D modeling software. With the drawing and object studies continuing, students were asked to investigate their 3-dimensional models for spatial opportunities. Eventually, each student was required to assign a scale to the 3D digital model.
As students continued to explore abstractive forms through making and drawing, they started to imagine these artifacts as spaces for people. Wood edges in their models became walls, and graphic marks in the drawings laid groundwork to imagine an environment people experience in the space. The imagined spaces varied in purpose and scale, from a corner wall in a cafe to a rooftop terrace, even to a large-scale farm. To symbolize the space, abstract shapes and lines within artifacts became the patterns and icons of a graphic identity. For instance, the graphic identity might have been derived from direction of sticks used in the model making process, or from the shape of pencil marks in the drawing. To tell the story of their work, students were tasked with creating a poster that linked all the projects together. The poster served as a way of settling their ideas into something tangible, revealing on a single surface the threads of similarity between the various projects: drawing, a model, a digital model. For each student, the intertwining of marks, making, and space imagining found its own path, as can be seen in these poster examples.
So as the studio progressed and towards the end of the studio, we really started to see the students become much more fluid at crossing mediums, right? So between the drawings and the models and the 3D models and the computer and also the posters, the graphic design posters that I created. And it became this much more embedded, iterative process. This was one thing we were going for in the studio. One of the students is quoted as saying, the EMBD 2100 studio course is one of the most eye-opening classes I've taken at Auburn. The hands-on modeling and analog drawings helped me feel much more confident in my design abilities. As our iterations were continuously improved and built upon, a true language was developed for each project. We learned how to tell a story with design and see a project through all phases. So at the end we had a gallery. So the images you're seeing now on the screen are a gallery that we set up in the architecture building at Auburn. And students, for the most part, we felt kind of grasped the idea of abstracting forms through multiple mediums. The students that struggled a bit more with the process had a hard time just with the concept of abstraction. So, you know, we'd like to say that all the students understood what we were trying to do, but I think that would be unfair. But the ones that struggled, you know, the idea of abstraction was to kind of get out of your head the things that we come to with design, especially for early design students. So some of the students did struggle with getting that kind of out of their head and the ability to abstract forms. Three kind of big takeaways from the studio were that abstraction is a very powerful concept. It's something a designer can use to explore form and space. Crossing mediums can facilitate divergent thinking or a really engaging iterative process. And that continuity across artifacts helps tell a stronger story. So the strongest students at the end, when we put their work up in the exhibit, we could really see how the form manifested itself through every artifact that we were making. True to Frank Lloyd Wright, you know, abstraction is a really powerful concept, and this studio really explored that concept for early design education students. Thank you.